So many thanks for the invitation today and the opportunity to just discuss with you the things that I'm going to talk about, which is actually a process which is just being set up. So what I can present you today is really some provisional findings and ideas from an upcoming project on ideologies of design in software coding, how we perceive it. So what I will present today actually are less solid results than tentative ideas on something we plan to investigate in more detail, hopefully, and especially if we get the money in forthcoming years. And the context of the talk is a major interdisciplinary research project, a so-called research group we have just proposed. So we are in the process of evaluation, where we, a group of colleagues from applied computer science, sociology, and sociolinguistics, set out to explore how software front-end and back-end design, and particularly its social evaluation, fuels into processes of software development and software use in social communities, and how it propels processes we call communification, that is the emergent maintenance and transformation of post-traditional, fluid, and deeply mediatized communities. And the social linguistic subgroup I'm part of, and Jonas Hassemer, who is also here, is part of, thereby aims to specifically investigate how design is imbued with social meaning and thus socially enregistered and discursively contested in the context of open source software. This field strikes us particularly interesting for several reasons. To begin with, many open source projects attempt to position themselves as a better alternative to commercial proprietary solutions. And in this context, not only the free availability and accessibility of the software is often promoted as distinctive value, but also the supposedly greater transparency, how it is often called, which promises not to do anything evil to you and your data, as every software is visible to the user. And this is where one of the keywords I'm talking about today, namely control, alludes to, although we shall see that this keyword control is highly ambiguous. Now, on top of these self-claims unique values of open source, and with the attempt to professionalize the software, the issue of design and good design in particular gained high value in some open source projects over the last years, and it is coupled with the traditionally central values. By taking up on design, these projects do not only attempt to show how they are on par or even ahead of commercial software, and particularly the successful design embracing software solutions of the 21st century, such as in particular Mac OS, they also try to distinguish themselves within the open source world. And this also is to be contextualized with the history and perception of traditional open source solutions, which often were confronted with the verdict that they might do their job more or less well, but that they look and feel rather clumsy and ugly, as you can see here in an example of a forum. Design in this context apparently emerged into a commodity, a selling value among and beyond open source aficionados, and hence is deeply imbued with ideology in this community. And this seems to strongly resonate with more overarching apotheosis of design in many late modern societies that has been critically labeled designification in STS and critical design studies. Now, the case we want to have a closer look in this project in particular is a major open source project which has just celebrated its 25th anniversary and which heavily embraces and promotes good design for its own products, namely the GNOME project, which develops a graphical desktop environment on top of Linux and aims at setting up a comprehensive and coherently designed software infrastructure in its orbit. I will say a bit more about the project later, but before I do that, I elaborate on the notion of design ideologies that which we draw on. And later I will talk about the project, and then I will elaborate a bit on some design ideologies in the context of the project and the struggles and that are evolving around these design ideologies. So first, let me say a bit about ideologies of design. Ideologies of design is a rather new concept that connects to metapragmatic theories on ideologies of communication. Ideologies of design thereby refers to sets of values and beliefs attributed to design, and ultimately construals about what design is and what design does. As Cameron Shelley put it in a chapter on architectural design, a design ideology is a set of principles and practices that constrain what counts as good design. More particularly, ideological constraints reflect the social values that a design is meant to reflect and to promote. Of course, principles and practices that constrain what counts as good design, by contrast, also determine what is bad design. So the concept rests on the assumption that design might be ascribed with social meaning. If that happens, design as a practice and designed artifacts are perceived as being meaningful through the form and formedness they materialize in. And as with other ideologies, such ascriptions might happen in some social realms more or to different degree than in others. However, with STS, design anthropology and critical design studies, we hypothesize that through the process of designification that took place in late modern society, a form and formedness and a particular discursive notion of design and designedness have generally accrued more social meaning in late modern society. So design seems to have developed into a widely accepted social capital, or as Apadure prominently phrased it, design is a fundamental human capacity and a primary source of social order. Of course, as Murphy and Wilf add, this also includes questions related to power. So design also has powerful effects. Against the backdrop of this, design ideologies are to be conceived of as ordering principles that, like language ideologies, delimit contingency and distinguish particular forms and processes of forming as being better, more appropriate, etc., than others. As Apadure goes on to note, design exists to tame the endless arrangements into which objects may find their way and to police the imagination of fashion, which is the high-octane force to which design is opposed. So here's an idea worth pausing over. Design exists not to serve fashion, but to limit its infinitude. In metapragmatic terms, design ideologies thereby serve as a strong axis of differentiation, to put it with Sugar and Judy Irvine, a contrasting sheen that orders indexical signs and what they are taken to represent. Indexical signs, in our context, are design elements or design practices that are linked with specific social values and beliefs with expected context and expected social actors. Through this indexical load, design and designing are constructs that are ideological through and through. We further assume that ideologies of design are often intricately linked with other ideologies of communication, particularly with language ideologies, media ideologies, or ideologies of mediation, and with what has been called semiotic ideologies. For instance, we can often find a sort of purism in design ideologies that disfavors ornamental design as standing in the way and limiting functionality, and highly praises simplicity, transparency, and a form follows function sort of hierarchization. In the overarching project, we furthermore employ a concept we call ideologies of communification, that is conceptions of what a community is and what it means to be part of this community. And we believe that such conceptions often draw on ideologies of communication, so ideologies of communification and ideologies of communication interact. And in the project, we particularly set out to explore how they are reciprocally linked with ideologies of design. And an important aspect of all these ideologies of X is that they are subject to social negotiation and contestation. Hence, what design and good design is often not consensual, but controversial, both in details and fundamentally. Such controversies, and we will see that later on with regards to our case. Such controversies emerge in metapragmatic discourse on design, which is a prime source for our analysis. So now, after having you bombarded with this theory and the plethora of ideologies there are, let me come back to the actual case. I will first give you some more information on the GNOME project, and then go on to focus on the ideologies of design and the contestation by example of some first insights, or not really solid empirical results yet, but some cases. GNOME, the project was launched in 1997 with the aim of developing a competitive graphical desktop environment for Unix-like operating systems, in particularly the then popular GNU system, which included the Linux kernel, since their own kernel, herd, never made it to something stable. As you can see here in the announcement letter of the project from 1997, GNOME is an acronym that stands for GNU Network Object Model Environment, whereas GNU is itself a recursive acronym which stands for GNUs, not Unix. And that's a typical nerd pun, if you will, and also a famous one. As we can see in the letter snippet as well, design, as you can see here in the letter snippet, design in the sense of a coherent look and feel was a central impetus right from the beginning of this project. Now, today, GNOME is one of the two major desktop environments included in most Unix-like distributions, the other one being KDE, which is a little less than a year older than GNOME, and from which GNOME departed, since KDE, as we can see here in, where's that, in that snippet. No, don't see. Never mind. GNOME departed from KDE explicitly, since KDE did employ a graphical toolkit that was not completely license-free, and this was conceived as running counter the control mantra, if you will. In addition to the desktop environment, GNOME develops and promotes a wide range of applications and an ecosystem for development consisting of software libraries, development tools, and platforms for development and discussion of developers. Now, over the last decade, GNOME reached out from its classical era of application, the personal computer, to new eras such as tablets and smartphones. Here you can see that, attempting to provide what they call a complete solution for users and developers of digital devices. Like other large free and open source projects, GNOME consists of an open group of volunteers and a smaller group of employed developers. The latter, as small as it is, however, is relatively strongly represented in the core group of developers. Most core development is really done by people who are employed by commercial software companies and are contracted to mainly work on the GNOME project. And this group of employed developers also constitutes a strong part in the organizational board of the project, particularly the non-profit GNOME Foundation, a decidedly political body, their own words, as you can see on the bottom of this image, believes in a world where everyone is empowered by technologies they can trust. We do this by building a diverse and sustainable free software personal computing ecosystem. So note how we can identify already here a strong ideology of communification. Yeah, we build up a free and equal community, and its linkage with ideologies of design. The non-fixed list of commercial organizations which financially support the project, and for instance, by employing full-time GNOME developers or by providing technology, currently includes, among other companies, Red Hat, Linux, Google, and Amazon. Major supporting non-profit organizations are the Free Software Foundation and the Document Foundation, which stands behind LibreOffice, for instance. As I already mentioned, GNOME takes a strong stance on design. If you enter the project's homepage, it's the first thing you will see. The first thing you learn, and this is where my title comes from, is that GNOME promises you to get, quote, things done with ease comfort, and control. And even more, you are instructed, you are instructed that as, quote, an easy and elegant way to use your computer, GNOME is designed to help you to have the best possible computing experience. Note how ease, elegance, and design are centered here right from the start, and how ease and elegance are intricately coupled with design. If you scroll down the homepage further down, you are being explained that GNOME is, quote, simple and easy to use, quote, intuitive and efficient, and, quote, finely crafted. And that, quote, every part has been designed to make it simple and easy to use, satisfying to use, and beautiful to behold. As we have seen before, this design mission is not only unfolded with regard to the GNOME desktop environment itself, so the central product, but also to the apps that are being developed, often by other groups of developers in the GNOME orbit. The project tries to encourage adherence to their design principles, which I will introduce a bit later, by setting up a center periphery classification of software that is thereby depicted as being more or less close to GNOME. At the center of this model are so-called GNOME core apps, who appear to perfectly align with the project's ideologies of design and ideologies of communication. They are created, as they say, so note the artisan terminology they use, and in the project's own words, which you also can see here in the image, quote, are all built with the GNOME philosophy in mind. They are easy to understand and simple to use, feature a consistent and polished design, and provide a noticeable attention to details. Naturally, they are free software and have committed to being part of a welcoming and friendly community. Note the ideology of communication. These apps will perfectly integrate with the GNOME desktop, so the core apps, end of quote. A bit more to the periphery as opposed to these core apps, but still in the project scope, is the so-called GNOME Circle. This is a selection of, quote, championing GNOME software, a circle for which you can apply with your own software at the GNOME Circle, with the benefit of getting promoted and gaining support from the GNOME Foundation. And as they proudly say, you can then also use the GNOME Circle badge on your own website. Among the application criteria to get into the circle is centrally the adherence to GNOME's design principles. So that's a crucial factor if you want your app to be in the circle. Beyond now these two distinguished realms are many apps that are classified by their developers as GNOME apps or apps for GNOME. Among them, some of the most prominent actually application of the GNOME universe, for instance, the email program Evolution, as well as apps written with GNOME's underlying graphical toolkit, GTK, such as the famous graphic editor, the GIMP. And many of them are listed on a much less polished and much less prominently placed wiki page on GNOME.org, which however also includes core and circle apps. So they have this REST category, which is a hodgepodge of more or less actively developed software that seems less under control of the project. And it is visually presented that way, in that much less designed way. The claimed dedication to a beautiful, effective, attractive, and easy to use and inclusive design, as the self-claimed design principles have it, manifests in elaborated human interface guidelines and a unique corporate design, including color palettes, fonts, icons, and so forth. And it is strategically promoted by a vociferous design team. I introduce the persons later, that conducts and presents usability and UX research, filled, as you can see here, with statistics, methodology, and rationalization, which a design team that elaborates and defends the project's design strategy, approaches developers actively with redesigning proposals, so saying, look, here we can help you with making your design of your application better, and which also governs the project's web design, promotion videos and merchandising via GNOME's own web shop, where you can buy t-shirts and cups and all that stuff. As Arindam Dutta argues in a work if we look at the design ideology lingering here in more detail, we can find many ingredients that have developed throughout modernity when design emerged as a social capital and distinguished itself from art. As Arindam Dutta argues in a work on this emergence, as of the mid-19th century, design distinguished itself from the mimesis-seeking art practices and started to develop an industrial forming practices that first attempted to establish complete control over a specific social realm, such as the living room, and second, as opposed to art, drew on the firm belief that such control must be subtle and non-noticeable. That is, good design is not noticeable as an aesthetic dimension. It supports the natural functionality of objects and guides the users without the user noticing that guidance, which is done. It guides the user particularly to use the object in the way it ought to be used. So that's, according to Dutta, how the modern design concept is constructed. GNOME's central keywords, ease, comfort, designed to help, effective, very much align with this design notion that has been particularly pushed forward in the 20th century product design, from the Bauhaus to wait a minute, from the Bauhaus and the Ulmer Hochschule für Gestaltung, in particular Otto Eicher, the most famous proponent of that school, over Dieter Rams of Braun, to one of his most prominent advocates, namely Johnny Ive of Apple, who, as you might know, very much is a fanboy of Dieter Rams and his design. Of course, more research needs to be done to reveal whether the GNOME designers, principally among other persons, the person responsible for the original design, William John McCann, and Alan Day, the current head designer of GNOME, whether and how they are directly influenced by these grand figures. But if we look at the stated design principles of the project, we can see striking similarities with Dieter Rams' principles. Both center accessibility, unobtrusiveness, simplicity, and at least if we look at how GNOME presents itself otherwise, for roughly coherent aesthetics. Now, in order to maintain this, the keyword control becomes central, and as we have seen, it becomes ambiguous. Good design, on the one hand, promises the user to gain control over the designed object, but on the other hand, design itself is deeply entangled with the desire of controlling how the infrastructure looks like. Again, Otto Eicher, think of the Olympic Games 1972, where Eicher hold control of any single detail from the stadium down to ballpoints, and Johnny Ive, think of Apple's closed and controlled computing universe, are cases in point for this attempt to control design. And as we have seen in the examples, GNOME's design mission also very obviously contains this desire to control GNOME's computing universe, supposedly to the benefit of the user in order to maintain their vision. As you might imagine, this is a delicate issue in the open source context where freedom and choice are among the most central keywords and constituents of the movement's ideology. So it will be interesting to follow more closely how the design team actually manages to keep the balance. And of course, there's much potential for controversy in that endeavor, as we will also see in a minute. At least from a first glance, control seems to be achieved mainly by a hegemonial strategy where developers and users, by way of incentives such as the promotion programs and through constant argumentation, are encouraged to embrace the grand vision and invited to share this ideology. So GNOME's design vision, which I sketched here, emerged, as we know it today, emerged as part of a grand mission, especially as of 2010, when a big redesign of GNOME, of the GNOME desktop environment was launched, where the rather classical GNOME 2 desktop, which you can see here, and you can see that is consists of the usual traditional elements such as icons, menus, and the taskbar, was replaced by a so-called shell in GNOME 3, which abandoned icons and menus in favor of a Mac-inspired dashboard and search bar. This was promoted as a revolutionary move and part of an endeavor that was framed as nothing less than the aim to build a beautiful operating system that will improve the world. So that's the mission in a nutshell. And that's what I have done and materialized then as of 2010, 2011. So how was this received? Now we enter the realm of the ideological struggles. The interesting thing is, and to the surprise of the designers and advocates of the design, that this redesign was not taken up as favorably as the designers probably had anticipated by the user community and also by fellow developers. Most prominently, Linus Torvalds, creator of the Linux kernel and widely known for his blatant statements, publicly expressed his dislike of GNOME 3 and called GNOME 3 a, quote, total user experience design failure, unacceptable and crazy crap. This follows some earlier critical statements of Torvalds where he stated that I personally just encourage people to switch to KDE, so the other one. These users are idiots and are confused by functionality. Mentality of GNOME is a disease, he says. If you think your users are idiots, only idiots will use it. I don't use GNOME because in striving to be simple, it has long since reached a point where it simply doesn't do what I need it to do. Please just tell people to use KDE. And even more to the point, if you will, that's not like any other open source project I know about. GNOME seems to develop by interface Nazis, where consistently the excuse for not doing something is not it's too complicated to do, but it would confuse users. So that's Torvalds. But Torvalds was not alone. I mean, he was the most prominent, of course. He's the iconic figure in the Linux world, but he was not alone with his stance. Many users stated their intent to abandon GNOME with GNOME 3. Several forks of the code were set up to maintain the previous design of GNOME 2, and these forks exist today, even after 10 years. Major distributions such as Ubuntu Linux dropped GNOME and developed their own solutions. And vivid design critical debates accompany each software release since then. Even some GNOME developers joined the critical core. A core developer publicly stated that GNOME is in a state of decadence. And argued that the GNOME way rigidly breaks with the vision of the free software movement and thus is no longer, quote, part of our culture. Major points that were raised in these debates are, as the quotes also have demonstrated, that first, GNOME 3 breaks with established user habits and expectations, and second, that it constantly removes options and features in favor of the simplicity mantra. The criticism boils down to the reproach that GNOME does not adhere to its own stated principle, ease, comfort, and control. The missed control here is, of course, control on the side of the users who, according to the critics, are being taken away control as the GNOME developers, the interface Nazis, as Torvalds had it, treat them as stupid dopes. Now, as you can imagine, this debate poses a serious challenge for the GNOME mission. To say the least, the design does not seem to be as self-evident to many users as has been anticipated. And rather than inclusion, a lot of fragmentation and alienation seems to have happened in the wake of the redesign. In our project, we want to look more closely whether this is due to conflicting design ideologies really, or rather due to different interpretations of design ideological assumptions such as ease, comfort, and control, and what this actually means. Also, we want to explore in more detail how the proponents of so good GNOME design react on such criticism. On a first glance, several major strategies can be identified, 4 strategies. The first strategies that I've seen reacting towards this is something I would call rationalization, the attempt to argue how the design strategies are really sane. Here it seems that references to scientific user experience research, in other words, scientification of the own endeavor seems to be a core strategy. So we have done research, and our design emerges from all kinds of empirical analyses. The second strategy is what I would call strategic propagation of GNOME's ideology, not so much the design itself, but the overarching ideologies in blog posts and talks. So the GNOME way, as it is called here, is proposed and promoted. The third strategy is what I would call stating uninformedness. So developers sometimes stress that users do not really know how an open source project works, that they erroneously equate an open source project with a commercial software company and thus raise wrong expectations about how they can request changes from a project. And in this context, we also, and this is from the same blog post, we also find claims of expertise. In this example, with regard to the design team, and please to trust the expertise of the design team, and that they are not bad persons, persons who are doing the best for you. And finally, we can also see how the criticism results in a rather defensive behavior. And this is a particularly striking example, I think, where some of the central goals and claimed strengths are even hidden in order to prevent further flame wars. What you can see here is an example from what came out as the release notes of GNOME 40, a recent release where the head of the design team advised people when they listed what has changed in this new release to, quote, downplay the extent and by implication disruptiveness of the design changes in the release notes. In fact, for a release that introduced yet another really salient design change. And apparently the design team decided not to make that prominent, but rather to downplay it, to not cause any more flame wars. So here the claim of continuity seems to outweigh the otherwise strong claim of creativity. And maybe this is also due to the belief that good design should operate in the background. So maybe such advices come from the idea that if people talk too much about design, then design comes too much in the way, and that's not what people want following this design notion I have sketched. All these attempts, of course, provoke themselves strong reactions and debates, which provide very rich sources for us to analyze. And we, of course, expect much more fine-grained and heterogeneous results than what I could present today in this few examples. Highly ambivalent and paradoxical strategies and ideological tensions. So there's a huge empirical field lying ahead of us. In a recent discussion about the topic, I was also pointed to the interesting question how public performance and the enregisterment of software design as a cultural thing and commodity might play a crucial role here, particularly if we compare the rather humble attempts of GNOME and the rough waters they are shipping in, as you have seen, with the most successful design-based endeavor in computer industry, namely Apple's comeback at the turn of the century, which in many ways is comparable actually to GNOME in terms of design ideologies. They are very much aligned with each other, but was of course much more successful, as you all know, not only due to Apple's financial force, but also due to the iconic performance It was contextualized in, and not least the ability of the company to socially register the main proponents behind the mission as nothing less than geniuses, and therewith all users who follow up on that as part of a big movement that really, as the jobs hagiography you see here has it, changes the world. Yeah, there's actually also a book about a third book about how's the current Apple CEO called, about him as a genius. So there are 3 genius books in the series. Of course, it's a bit unfair to compare these 2 cases, but it might shed light on how design ideologies most centrally rest on emotions and affect and their indexical linkages with figures of personhood, and less on rationalization and alleged scientific facts. In the same way, as we know, then language ideologies do rest crucially on emotions and affect. But this is a topic for another much more future talk, and we have to investigate into that. So come to the conclusions now. I have presented you here with some initial, arguably superficial thoughts on a major endeavor we are just about to embark on. Even given that, I hope I could show you that how design and design ideologies are incredibly interesting and are also an instructive topic in software development and use, particularly if the social dynamics and engagement aspect are under focus. And of course, I'm very much looking forward to your comments, ideas, and critique to a topic that will probably concern me for some time now, and my colleagues as well. Talking of concern, I also can bring the muddled history of the GNOME design initiative to a somewhat appeasing end, at least as for one prominent case and for the time being. In 2013, Linus Torvalds announced that he has been moving back to GNOME, and apparently he is still there. And here you can see him proudly showing his desktop computer running GNOME 3. And maybe this will leave some of you with more ease and comfort. So that was it for the moment. Thank you very much for your attention.